Accountancy meeting on July 21st, 2017. We'll go ahead and do a quick roll call, and we'll start on my right with Ms. Park.
Sunny Youngson Park.
General Yang.
Jose Campos.
Alicia Burhow.
Katrina Salazar.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Kathleen Wright.
Deirdre Robinson.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. We're going to go back to item 1D, and we're going to have a presentation on California cannabis laws and recent rulemaking activities with Lori Ajax, our Chief Bureau of Medical Cannabis Regulation. So we'd like to invite you to come forward. Thank you so much for your patience.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we are happy to have you today, and it is my job to say nice things about you. So I'm going to go ahead and read your bio real quick. So Ms. Ajax is the first chief of the newly formed Bureau of the Medical Cannabis Regulation. Prior to her appointment, Chief Ajax served as Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control, where she spent 22 years working her way up the ranks, starting at the investigator trainee level. Ms. Ajax has spent 10 years in private industry prior to her state government career, and she holds a bachelor's of science degree in criminal justice and from California State University, Sacramento. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I'm happy to be here. So I thought I'd just start off by sort of giving you a brief overview of what we've been doing for the last year and a half, and then talk about what's in store for us over the next 5.5 months. As you stated, I was hired last February. The Bureau was created from the signage of the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, and that was how the Bureau was created, and we were responsible for setting up the first state regulatory system for medicinal cannabis. As most of you know, Proposition 215 was passed, an initiative passed by the voter a couple of decades ago. So there was a lot of folks operating, using medical cannabis, and you had some cities and counties that regulated it, but the state did not have any kind of system that regulated that. Things changed pretty dramatically in November when the voters passed the AUMA, or Proposition 64, which then expanded the Bureau's role to include adult use cannabis regulation. So now we're responsible for both setting up the state regulatory system for both medical and adult use cannabis. So obviously that's created challenges, because at that point we had two different statutes. We had the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, and we would call it MCRSA, and then we had Proposition 64. Similar in some areas, but there was still some differences, and so we were looking at having to set up regulations for two different statutes, basically having different sets of rules for our licensees based on whether they were going to operate medicinal or adult use. So what's been going on in the last month or so, the governor came out with his budget trailer bill, SB 94, that essentially would align the two models, so that we're regulating it as like one product, medical and adult use, but one set of statutes. So that was signed by the governor on June 27th. And I'm getting, these acronyms get hard to keep up with. So we now have the Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. I like to just call it, if I can, the Act now, because it's like Mal Cursa or something. So what that did is essentially it repealed the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, and it amended AUMA. And so that is so we have one set of statutes to regulate the commercial cannabis market, and we will be, as a whole, the state will be licensing the cultivation, the manufacture, the distribution, and the retail dispensing of medical and adult use cannabis. As probably some of you know, before this was signed, the Bureau, along with the Department of Public Health and the Department of Food and Ag, had come out with our draft medical regulations. because Food and Ag has the cultivators, they're licensing the cultivators, and then Public Health has the manufacturers, and then the Bureau will be licensing everybody else, and that is the distributors, the testing laboratories, the retailers, and we have what's called a micro business now. So we all came out with our draft medical regulations because there's a lot of rules we need to put into place so we can start issuing licenses. So those came out at the end of April. We did all of our public hearings to get comments, and then SB 94 was passed at the end of June. So we had closed our public comment, but now, since all of our draft regulations were for medical and they referenced all the MCRSA statutes, and since that's now been repealed, we're going to have to withdraw those medical regulations and now come up with new regulations. We're going to use a lot of what we had in our medical, but now we've got to put that all into a new set of regulations. And we'll be using our emergency rulemaking authority to do that because we are statutorily required to issue licenses on January 1st of 2018. And we have to have our regulations in place and finalized in order to do that. Wow. So we're used to going with the flow here. So you guys having me wait out there for a few minutes is like, that was easy.
Yeah.
See?
Sounds like you've been busy.
We're a little busy. That's what I say. Got a great staff. So what we're doing right now, we are going through all those comments that we got because we got thousands of comments. So we're going through them all. We're going to summarize those comments. And then we're going to make that available on our website. And then, again, we're going to use a lot of those comments as we go forward to developing our new set of regulations. Along with that, we also are doing a environmental initial study for CEQA. And so does the California Department of Food and Ag. They're actually doing an environmental impact report. We have the same contractor that we're both using, so that also has to be completed before our regulations can be finalized. And we're also doing economic analysis as required because we are doing major regulations. We did one for the medical market. Now we're doing one for the adult use market. And we have contracted out with the University of California at Davis to assist us with that. So all of that has to be completed before we can start issuing licenses in order to finalize those regulations. We are also putting a new online licensing system together. That's taking a lot of our time. We went with the software program Acela along with the California Department of Food and Agriculture because they also have to do the same thing. So we are working on that. We're hoping to have, that's been a very, a lot of work. We have to get this up and ready in a very short period of time. We're actually hoping to have the online license application available prior to January 1st of 2018 so we can start taking in applications, start processing, getting our staff used to looking at it on the back end. So we'll be in a position to issue those licenses. We're actually looking to issue licenses on January 2nd of 2018. Along with that, we're also advising the California Department of Food and Ag on the track and trace system. A vendor has just been announced for that. The state is going with Metric, which is currently doing track and trace for Colorado, Oregon, Maryland, Alaska, and I believe Michigan. So the state is working on that, and one of the obviously staffing. We are looking to hire over 80 people over the next year. So we are staffing, and then we're also looking for a new facility. We're currently housed at the Department of Consumer Affairs, but we have run out of room, so we're looking for a new facility. So I probably missed a few things.
Is there
but
no openings here in this building? No?
Yeah, this is a beautiful building, by the way. So that's where we're at. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Obviously do have questions. Ms. Wright.
Well, one, thank you so much for coming. And number two, yes, I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask, starting first with probably what is one of the bigger issues for this board, but also would be shared with your board, and that is the status of a state-issued license in light of the fact that the sale of marijuana in any capacity is a Tier 1 controlled substance under federal law and is illegal. And so the question that has been answered by several boards, and I can read a couple of summaries of what several of the other state boards of accountancy have said on this matter, but the issue is, what is the status of a license, a state-issued license in California, if the federal government were to prosecute the person conducting the activity?
So I'm sorry, but I think that's not on the agenda. We could certainly put that on a future agenda item, but this is about the Bureau's rulemaking and statutory development.
Well,
not
this is,
about-
no, I thank you, Christy, and if that's the case, I'd be glad to drop the issue, but what the other state boards, as an example, the State Board of Accountancy in Nevada, the guidance that they have issued with respect to the sale of recreational marijuana basically says, and I thought Nevada's was actually the best, Nevada licensees that elect to provide services to the marijuana industry legalized in any state where a licensee practices will not face action by the board, referring to the Board of Accountancy, for simply offering professional services. The board's position does not negate the fact that action might be taken by the board against a licensee who is found guilty of a federal criminal act. So the
So,
questions that
I think that would be an excellent future agenda item, but I think Ms. Ajax is not in a position to comment. I mean, I can't speak for you.
Well, Ms.
on this
But
issue.
your board is licensing the recreational sale of marijuana and the medical sale of marijuana.
That's correct.
And maybe we should start there. Could you explain a little bit about what will be involved in obtaining a license from your board to conduct those activities?
So they're going to have to apply for we're having an application online, or they can get a paper one, and there's going to be a background check, and there have to be fingerprinted, and we'll do our investigation similar to other licensing entities. What's a little probably different with this is that the locals have a big piece in this. There's local control, so that licensee also have to be in compliance with the local jurisdiction. So, for example, Sacramento has a very robust licensing system, so we would have to make sure before we issue a license, and this is under the new act, that they are in compliance with all local regulations and ordinances before we issue a license. If we have a jurisdiction that bans cannabis, then the state would not be able to issue a license in that area. So a lot of coordination with the locals.
So just real quick, in terms of local, does that mean city/county?
Yes, city or
okay.
county,
City or
yes.
county, okay, sorry,
Yes.
keep going.
Yeah.
So there would be no examination process or anything like that with respect to professional skill base. It would just simply be payment of a fee to perform the activity, and then getting the license, which would then have to be in compliance with city and county local ordinance.
Yeah, we obviously are making sure that the facility, because we're actually licensing the person, but we're licensing the premises too. So they have to be in compliance with making sure that for the activity they're conducting, they have a brick and mortar, like for a retail store. We have to make sure they have a brick and mortar store, and that they're in compliance with all of our regulations. There's, if you look at our draft regulations, like for a retailer, there's security requirements for cameras and locks, and making sure there's some employee requirements. So they have to be in compliance with all of that, and then making sure they are authorized by the locals to do that.
So if a person were granted this license to do this, and then a city or a county or any other governmental body were to revoke that license, would that also revoke your license?
Yes, we would want to make sure we did our due diligence but in essence, yes, if they're no longer in compliance with the locals, we'd either look at what the reasons were and either look at revoking it ourselves or not renewing the license, because they're subject to a yearly renewal.
I know Ms. Hines had a question. Oh,
Go
are
ahead.
you still?
No, yeah, I do, but please, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, who needs to get a license? Like, what level of activity, cannabis-related activity, requires someone to get a license? Is it anyone that offers any kind of cannabis-related product? Is it cultivators, distributors? Like, what's
There's
the
like
level?
Yeah.
22 of them.
Anybody that's doing commercial cannabis activity. So obviously under Prop 215, you can still have, grow up to 6 plants for your personal, for your own personal use, and we also have people that are caregivers. So those folks wouldn't need a license. But anybody that's interested in, growing or manufacturing or distributing or selling recreational medicinal market for, within California would need a license. So they're doing it commercially, and they're not doing it for themselves.
So like restaurants, if restaurants are offering, cannabis, products that contain cannabis in them, but they are not, that's not the primary purpose of their business, would they be required? Like, what's the,
Yeah, there's nothing specific right now that would allow a restaurant to do it. If you look at the act, if a restaurant had an alcohol license, you can't have alcohol and cannabis on the same premises. I think the industry, it might, right now you can manufacture products, food products, but Department of Public Health has some pretty strict requirements and regulations in place for that. So if somebody wants to create like their edibles, like a brownie or whatever, yes, they would have to have a facility to do that, and they would have to be approved by the Department of Public Health to manufacture, and then they'd be subject to, the regulations on labeling and the amount of THC, the potency, and whatnot.
and then but they would still then also, they would not have to get a license though from your agency?
That would be, if it's manufacturing, which is our edibles and concentrates, and they would get that from the Department of Public Health. Yeah. Sort of similar, I mean, they're different, alcohol and cannabis are very different products, but some of that licensing is very similar to alcohol. Where you have the manufacturer, you have distributors, you have retailers.
I'm thinking about it in the context of if you have, from the accountant's perspective, if they have clients who are, a restaurant, they have both, cannabis edibles as well as, non-cannabis products, obviously, how do they go about representing them in, professionally, in, advising them about how to operate their business or how to, manage their accounting practice. I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
about.
That might be a good future agenda item as well.
Okay.
So we're going off
But that's the
idea.
context, that's why I'm asking the question, like, trying to generate, like, what are the
Ideas.
things that we should be thinking about as a board, both from the perspective of our licensees, engaging in the use themselves, but also our licensees engaging in representing businesses that are engaged in the cannabis. So I'm just trying to think about some of those different issues, yeah.
What's the involvement of your organization in that whole question about federal versus state law? Because obviously these individuals, depending on what their other responsibilities are going to have ramifications, be it CPAs being able to serve them, or you name your piece. But what is the involvement of your organization in any of that dialogue or process to try to resolve that?
Well, the Bureau, we're not involved in any dialogue, the Bureau itself, with the federal government. I was appointed to implement state law, and so that's what we're doing, implementing what we currently have in front of us with state law. The administration is, they are looking at engaging the federal government on a variety of issues, not just, the rescheduling, but, there's also the banking issue. State Treasurer John Chung has formed a cannabis banking working group that the Bureau is a part of, but no direct dialogue with the federal government on behalf of the Bureau.
Yeah.
An extension of that question, what about with the State Attorney General's office? you know, to what extent is your agency working with the AG's office to discuss the legal, you know, ramifications that could come up over the course of, you know, businesses engaging in this?
Yeah, we obviously, we have a lot of dialogue with the Attorney General's office, especially as we go forward with developing our regulations, because we want to make sure they weigh in on what we're requiring from our licensees. In addition, we utilize, there'll be, when we have our enforcement cases, we have a dialogue with them about that. So we're in contact with them on a variety of issues, including some of, you know, with the tribes, because we have a lot of tribes that want to cultivate on tribal lands. So a lot of interaction with the Attorney General's office.
Oh, interesting. Casinos and cannabis, that might be
Yeah.
interesting. Ms. Wright?
Do any of your procedures require any sort of an audit process, any kind of an audit of what the licensee is doing?
Yeah, well, and there, hopefully we're talking about this, you may have a different idea of audit, but yes, part of, they will be required to always, we're making a requirement that they have to report any inventory discrepancies, so that will require them to be constantly looking at their inventory, because one of the things that we look at is the federal guidance for that's still in place, which is the Cole memo for states that have legalized commercial cannabis. So we want to make sure that our licensees are not diverting any of the cannabis. So that is one of the ways. We also are going to have our enforcement staff that will be going in on a regular basis to inspect the premises and looking at all of their procedures that they have in place for inventory reconciliation, for security requirements. Also, a big part of this, I probably should have mentioned earlier, is all the cannabis that goes to the retail market has to be tested. The testing labs is a huge part of this, so once the cultivator or the manufacturer, before it goes to market to the retailer, it has to go through a testing lab. That's where the distributor comes in. That distributor is responsible for setting up, making sure that the cannabis is taken to the testing lab. We have a testing agent that will come over, take the representative sample, and then the distributor then gets the certificate of analysis on whether it passed or failed, and they're responsible to do all those quality control checks, making sure that it's passed testing, that all the labeling is correct, and then it can go to the retailer. So there is going to be a lot of auditing at that, and the distributor now is also responsible for remitting the tax to the, they're the California Department of Tax and Fee, I believe, the former Board of Equalization. That is now a new department. So that distributor is a big piece. We're required in the new act to have compliance monitors that will be going to the distributor, making sure they're collecting the taxes, remitting that, and doing it correctly, doing those quality control. And so we envision that would be probably a team of people that would include an auditor, along with some other staff with different expertise, some probably people that understand the laboratory procedures and whatnot, to make sure they're taking the right amount of sample and things of that nature.
The reason I ask the question is, in some of the other states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana before California did it in November, one of the biggest questions that has come up with their CPA boards is with respect to CPAs in general being asked to perform certain of these audit tests, and whether or not they can do it, and then the questions unfold from there regarding the dilemma with federal and also the requirements of the audit and the state boards and whatnot. The distributor, how is the distributor going to be licensed? Because you are absolutely correct, the bill that the governor signed definitely places the burden of collection and remittance of the excise tax on this party, quote, called the, quote, the distributor. And I was a little confused when I read the act as to just who that person was. I understood very easily the cultivator, the manufacturer, and the retailer, but I didn't really fully understand who the distributor was.
Yeah, that's changed also. So under the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, it was a independent distributor, meaning that a cultivator or manufacturer or retailer could not also hold a distributor license. That changed with the passage of SB 94. Now there is pretty much complete vertical integration of the license types, with the one exception of the testing lab. A testing lab has to be completely independent, cannot have an interest in any other license type. But now, under the new act, a distributor's license could be held by a manufacturer or cultivator. So you could have a cultivator that also wants to get a distributor license, and then you could also have an independent distributor that's all they do. So you're going to see a lot of folks that are probably going to want to do their own distribution, especially the cultivators and manufacturers that may not go to an independent distributor.
Oh, you mentioned another term that I did see in the new legislation that I also did not fully understand, and that was track and trace.
So track and trace, similar to other states, it will track the cannabis product from seed to all the way to retail sale. So each plant is going to have what they call an RFID tag on it, and as it goes through the supply chain, it'll have a unique identifier that we can track throughout the whole process. So if you got to a point where a product needed a recall, you would be able to track, where that cannabis came from and where it is in the supply chain. And
So
that
it's-
helps us for even tracking, even for auditing purposes of.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
right. And then the tax stamps process that's described in the legislation, that threw me a bit, although I do understand the nature of the problem, which is the fact that most banks, are not, at least commercial banks, are not going to open bank accounts for this business. And so, but I'm not sure this is a question for yourself in light of the fact that you're not the agency that is going to be collecting the excise tax. But there's a whole product bag labeling procedure that is going on in the statute, and then there's a tax stamp procedure that is also going on in the statute. And I was a little unclear whether that related more to inventory control or it was an attempt to establish a methodology of remittance outside of the fact that, in light of the fact that these businesses are probably not going to be able to get a checking account.
Yes, I can't answer your question on the tax stamp. I think that would be that would probably be good to have somebody who represents the new tax and fee department.
Right.
But you're absolutely right with a lot of these folks can't get bank accounts. It's a cash business.
Literally.
Yes, and which makes it difficult for all of the licensing authorities, including the taxing authorities, to, collect large sums of cash from these people. So the Bureau, as we go forward with our new facility, just to give you an idea, we have to have measures in place to obviously protect the public and our employees, because we're going to have to take large sums of cash. And we also, in the act, we have to set up a North Coast office. The Bureau is responsible by July 1 of 2018 in order to take taxes and fees. So we're working together with the taxing agencies and the other licensing authorities to get that, to try to make it so we don't have people on the road with, thousands and thousands of dollars of cash. Yeah.
And in light of the fact that this business is now literally going to be a cash basis business, the IRS has a reporting requirements of Form 8300 for every deposit that you receive over $10,000, and they've levied some pretty hefty fines against these businesses in other states for failing to file that form, and they're sort of caught between.
Yeah. It's definitely a challenge, and for any regulator, as you folks know, when it's completely cash, it's also when you have to pay all your vendors in cash. It's just, it makes it's another layer of difficulty when you're doing audits and whatnot.
Well, and on that note, have you looked at the other states and kind of started to pinpoint some best practices in order to be able to implement some cash and carry type of thing moving forward as this law becomes implemented?
Yes, we have. Washington's managed to, they have some credit unions that have,
Interesting.
that are banking the industry, you know, and the Treasurer's Banking Working Group meeting has brought in, we've been meeting since January, having monthly meetings, and each month they're bringing in people that have some solutions to this issue, and they've also been bringing all the other states in and talking about their challenges and some of their ideas, and they will be putting together a report from all of this that should be available probably in the later this year.
Interesting. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much
Yeah,
for being here
absolutely.
today and
Yeah.
answering all of our questions. Oh,
I'm so sorry.
Ms. Wright.
I am so sorry. A lot of discussion in this group relates to what an out-of-state CPA can do in the state of California. Others on here today are expert above and beyond me, but called practice privilege, so to speak. If someone came into the state from out of state and had a license from the other state to sell, in that state at least, marijuana, would there be any kind of reciprocity with other states?
Meaning they could use their license in our state to
Yeah.
conduct commercial cannabis activity? No reciprocity. There was originally in Proposition 64 a residency requirement, but that went away in the new act. So there's no residency requirement. So if somebody came from another state, they'd have to apply like anybody else and go through our application process and standards.
And I assume anybody in our state who wanted to sell marijuana, say in Oregon, if you were up near the border or something like that, they'd have to do the same. There'd be no reciprocity.
No, I don't, there is no, and of course, you know, our cannabis can't be exported out of the state.
Okay.
We know there is a lot that is being exported, but legally it
That
can't,
is
there
not
is
one.
no,
Good
you
to
know,
know.
somebody, I mean, Nevada, you know, they've just gotten started with
Yes.
their recreational market, and I know they've run out of product, and, you know, we can't send them
We
any
can't help
product
them
from
out.
here.
We
so-
cannot help them out. Noted.
Yeah.
Noted.
It's not like water.
Yes. That's a whole other,
Yeah.
whole other topic of
I mean, you
discussion.
bring up a good point when you have when you look at, you take for granted when you have a product that's federally legal, like alcohol.
Right.
There's a lot of things that the federal government does when it comes to like the testing and the labeling approval. A lot of that is done at the federal level, including like the use of pesticides and so when it's federally illegal, a lot of that lands, all of that lands on the state, which makes it,
Difficult.
there you go,
Yes. Ms. Robinson.
My question is, are you lobbying or other states lobbying with the at the federal level to be able to loosen the screws, if you will, on some of their regulations as it pertains to this industry?
Yeah, I think especially when you look at the map of where currently you have legalized, the states that legalize, it's a lot in the western states, right? And so I think that is something that's starting to happen, is getting a coalition of those states to start working on, you know, the federal government. I don't know where that is at that point, but I think you're going to, as you continue to see, if you looked at this last election, you continue to see more and more states legalizing either medical or both.
Would your bureau be the one that would be active in participating for the state of California?
I don't know. That would be up to the administration if they wanted us to participate in that role. We've got our hands full right now, so.
A little bit busy.
I'm-
Got it. All right, last chance.
I think,
Close her down.
yeah.
All right then.
Well, the biggest thing for us, I think, is, let me rephrase my question. Almost several states, not just one or two, but several states, their boards of accountancy have issued a statement regarding how.
That's consistent with that future agenda topic. that we
Yeah.
talked
So
about
I
before.
think
Let's
we
just
Yeah, I
move
think
on.
we
Let's-
should.
let's- okay.
And I think that we
And we can bring that up when we get to the agenda.
all right,
All
very
right.
good.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Ajax,
you.
for being here today. We appreciate your comments, and we look forward to working with your agency and ensuring that we have consumer protection for the public moving forward, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to go ahead and move on to item agenda 13 with committee reports, and we are going to start with Mr. Campos from the Mobility Stakeholder Group.
Materials under 13A, items 2 and 3 were written reports only. Item A4 is discussion and possible action regarding the findings of NASBA, section 5096.21C. Staff reported that the purpose of this agenda item is to allow the CBA the opportunity to discuss NASBA's findings related to that code. The findings would be used by the CBA to determine whether allowing licensees of certain states to continue practicing under a no-notice, no-fee practice privilege fulfills the responsibility of the CBA to protect consumers. We were privileged to have Maria Caldwell from NASBA present to provide an update, and she did communicate that Puerto Rico, which was the last jurisdiction that had not yet implemented the internet disciplinary flag, had in fact accomplished that this week. And so that really brought all jurisdictions to substantial equivalency, not just with the enforcement guidelines that we spent a significant amount of time as a committee dealing with previously, but now with the internet flag as well. Staff also verified that each jurisdiction's disciplinary flag, either via that accountancy board's website or through CPA Verify, was in fact functioning as we were communicated by NASBA. The MSG congratulated NASBA on its progress. You know, frankly, congratulations went to all of the jurisdictions that really put significant effort behind this, and NASBA played a big role, not only in helping us evaluate, but also in providing counsel to the states on how to accomplish this. The MSG determined that based on NASBA's report, the sampling of states' assessments, and staff's verification of the disciplinary flag, that all jurisdictions are substantially equivalent. And so with that, we bring a motion to this board. The MSG recommends that all the remaining jurisdictions that had not been previously identified as substantially equivalent, including Alabama, Northern Mariana Islands, Maryland, New Hampshire, Puerto Rico, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virgin Islands, and Virginia, to be determined substantially equivalent to NASBA's guiding principles of enforcement.
So this is a fully formed motion from the Mobility Stakeholder Group. Are there any questions? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Alicia
Oh.
Burhill.
Oh, I'm sorry, public comments. Are there any public comments? Seeing none? Sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Please go ahead and call for the vote.
Alicia Burhill.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes?
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Jen Oying.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
One request for staff.
Yes.
There is, let's verify that attachment 4 that we have to the guiding principles, and just make sure that the minutes reflect every single jurisdiction on there.
Okay.
We think we've captured them all, I
Yeah.
think, but if not, we can think about that going forward. Item A5 is discussion and possible action regarding the 2017 Mobility Stakeholder Group final report. Staff reported that this final MSG report contains data and details that span the entire length of the MSG's activities since its formation in 2014. In May of 2017, the MSG provided staff with feedback on the draft report. The statistics provided in the final report are current through May 31st of 2017. And the MSG directed staff to update the findings and statistics in the final report and place the report on the September MSG agenda. No action was taken on this item.
Okay.
Item A6 is discussion possible action regarding the CBA's draft report to the legislature pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 5096.21F. This code requires the CBA to submit a report to the legislature by January 1st of 2018 that explains at a minimum the following. 1, how the board implemented the program and whether implementation is complete. 2, whether the current program, in the opinion of the board, offers more, less, or equivalent protection to the public than the previous program. And 3, describes how other state boards of accountancy have addressed referrals to those boards from the CBA, including the time frame in which those referrals were addressed and the outcome of investigations conducted by those state boards. The MSG discussed the report section by section. Staff stated that the draft report was comprised of 6 main sections and provided an overview of each section, which include 1, an executive summary, 2, a history and a background, 3, implementation of the mobility program, 4, how other states address CBA referrals, timeframes to address such referrals and outcomes of their investigations, 5, California mobility program evaluation, including whether it's equivalent, less, or more public protection than the prior practice privilege program, and 6, a conclusion. Staff will continue to work with DCA on the final layout and look for the report. Okay. Additionally, staff will continue to evaluate the appropriate statistical information for inclusion and placement in the report. Worthwhile going through is the 8 areas that the legislature requested a CBA opinion on as to whether the mobility program is more, less, or equivalent in public protection. And so that was outlined in the draft report. I will briefly summarize, including some updates that were made during our dialogue. 1, as to minimum qualifications, they were determined to be equivalent between both programs. 2, notification requirements under the prior program. There was a notification requirement, and that was eliminated under the current program. While staff will evaluate the wording further in the document, the consensus of the committee was that these were equivalent under the current and the prior program on balance. 3rd, similarly, the old program with the notification had an explicit term or expiration. The current one without such does not, but you kind of look through to the licensee from the other, the license of the individual from the jurisdiction that they've received it from, which would have some kind of term or expiration. And so while staff will evaluate the language further on, similarly on balance, we believe that was equivalent. 4th, jurisdiction, again equivalent. 5th was accounting firm registration. So under the prior, prior program, the firms worked through an authorized practice privilege holder, whereas under the current program, the test services need to be through a registered firm in the state, and so we believe that provided more public protection. 6 is consumer access to information, the internet disclosure of disciplinary information, lookup features, things like that. We believe that provides more public protection under the new program. 7, enforcement. Under the previous program, there was no benchmark for the other states' enforcement programs, whereas under the new program, all states are substantially equivalent to NASBA's guiding principles of enforcement. So there's been a specific evaluation process, which we believe to afford more public protection under the current program. State-level oversight. There was no MSG under the prior program. There is under this from a monitoring standpoint, which we believe afforded more public protection. The MSG discussed this report, directed staff to provide a revised version of the report at the September MSG meeting with an eye towards approval at the November meeting. Again, no action on this particular item at this meeting. We then talked about item A7, CPA Verify, and consistent with the prior meetings, 51 jurisdictions currently use CPA Verify and ALD, with 4 states still pending. This was information and no action taken. And then finally, item A8, future agenda topics. These would include review and possible recommendation that the CBA approve the report to the legislature, and then a discussion about the role and responsibilities and probably composition of the MSG itself following completion of the CBA report to the legislature, and that'll be a dialogue at a future meeting, since really the work that was stipulated in the regs has substantially been completed at this point, and we'll take that one on. So that concludes that report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campos.
May I ask a question? I'm sorry, is
Go
it
for it.
question time?
Yep.
Go
Okay.
for it.
With respect to the MSG, or the general rules, would a out-of-state CPA who has a practice privilege in California be eligible to represent a taxpayer in front of the Office of Tax Appeals, which is the newly created administrative body to hear tax appeals? The reason that I asked the question is it was brought up by the AICPA, and I didn't know the answer. And so,
That seems like it's a question for whatever that body is and who it allows. I mean, so that's not a specific item we've taken up as an MSG.
does everything that a CPA, well, no, I know the answer to that question. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Sure
I'll
somebody
tell the
can look at that.
AICPA to go back to the Office of Tax Appeals and ask.
It could, I mean, it sounds like a question for staff. Look
We
at
can
that.
direct that to them.
Yeah, well, the question, here's what I think I know, but let me just be sure I'm correct in my understanding. Someone who has a practice privilege actually does not have the right to do everything that a CPA licensed in California and practicing in California can do, because they can't advertise if nothing else. Would that be correct? Or no?
No, I don't think so.
that would not be correct.
Okay.
I mean, they are entitled to perform the same functions if they meet the requirements of the practice privilege program. So as long as they aren't headquartered in this state, they can do the same functions and they meet the requirements under California law. I do know that, I think they were pursuing legislation to clarify the title issue, correct? About how isn't there the board has proposed legislation to further clarify whether you're considered a CPA under, did you already do that? Was that prior year? Okay, so we did clarify that, so no, there's really no, that I'm aware of any difference except that you can't be headquartered.
If you're a CPA in another state and you meet all the mobility requirements, you're a CPA in
In
California.
this state, yes.
Okay, then you should be able to represent a client for whom you did a California tax return before this new Board of Tax Appeals.
Right, so I mean, the charge here is, you know, if you've got a valid license from somewhere else and you meet all the requirements, you're a CPA in this state, and hence you would do whatever a CPA is entitled to.
Okay.
Alrighty. So at this point, we're going to take a 5-minute break because we need to maintain a quorum. So I want everyone to be back here in 5 minutes because we're going to be voting on some legislative issues. So we'll have you come back here at 10:53. We are moving on to item 13B, the Legislative Committee, with a report from Ms. Hines.
Thank you very much, President. The California Board of Accountancy met yesterday, and this is my report. Item number 8B2 is the California Board of Accountancy 2017 Legislative Tracking Chart, which is included in our materials. Staff reported that the purpose of this item was to present the status of legislation being followed by the CBA. The Legislative Committee did not take action on this item. Assembly Bill 703, which is agenda item 8B3A, professions and vocations licenses fee waivers. Staff reported that AB 703 would require every board within DCA to grant a fee waiver for application and issuance of an initial license for an applicant who is married to or in a domestic partnership or other legal union with an active duty member of the Armed Forces of the United States if the applicant holds a current license in the same profession in another state, district, or territory. This bill failed to pass out of its house of origin by the legislative deadline and is therefore now a two-year bill. Staff suggested that the legislative committee maintain its support position. The LC did not take action on this item. Agenda item 8B3B, Assembly Bill 710, the Department of Consumer Affairs Board's meetings. Staff stated that AB 710 would require every board within the DCA to meet once every other calendar year in rural California. This is a two-year bill, and staff suggested that the LC maintain its watch position. The LC did not take an action on this item. Item 8B3C, Assembly Bill 767, Master Business License Act. Staff stated that AB 767 was amended to authorize GoBiz and a state agency determined by GoBiz to have a license which is appropriate for inclusion in the bill's proposed Master Business License System to borrow money from the general fund to support the reasonable cost of integrating into the system. This is now a two-year bill, and staff suggested that the LC maintain its watch position, so we did not take action on this item. 8B3D, Assembly Bill 912, Small Business California Small Business Regulatory Fairness Act. Staff reported that AB 912 would require most state agencies to help a small business comply with all statutes and regulations administered by the state agency and in any enforcement action by the state agency. The bill would require state agencies to create a policy as specified that provides for the reduction and under certain circumstances waiver of civil penalties for a small business. This is a two-year bill, and staff suggested that LC maintain its watch position. After yesterday's enforcement report, I suggested that staff should include relevant enforcement data in future CBA legislative position letters. The LC did not take further action on this item. 8B3E, Assembly Bill 1005, Professions and Vocations Fines Relief. Staff reported that AB 1005 would require DCA's non-healing arts boards and bureaus to issue a fix-it ticket with a 30-day cure period before an administrative fine becomes effective for violation of the applicable licensing act or regulation. If the licensee abates the violation within the 30-day period, the licensee would not be responsible for payment of the administrative fine. This is a two-year bill, and staff suggested the LC maintain its support if amended position, so we did not take further action on this item. 8B3F, Assembly Bill 1190, Department of Consumer Affairs Breeze System Annual Report. Staff reported that AB 1190 would require the Department of Consumer Affairs to publish a quarterly update on its website regarding the progress of implementing the third phase of the Breeze system. The CBA took a support position during its March meeting. At that time, AB 1190 required DCA to submit an annual report to the legislature regarding the implementation of the third phase of the Breeze project. Since then, the bill was amended to require DCA to publish on its website certain estimated timeframes, status updates, and results and recommendations related to the Breeze project. Staff were recently contacted by the author's office to ask if the CBA still had a support position given the recent amendments. The LC considered this item, and the LC recommends that the CBA send an updated support letter on AB 1190 as amended on June 13th, 2017.
Okay, so there's a motion from the legislative committee. Are there any questions from the board members? Or any questions from the public? Okay, we'll call for the vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Deidre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park,
Yes.
Jin O Yang,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll continue with my report. 8B3G, Senate Bill 27, Professions and Vocations Licenses Military Service. Staff reported that SB 27 would require every board within DCA to grant fee waiver for the application and issuance of an initial license to an applicant who is an honorably discharged veteran. This bill does not apply to examination application or renewal fees. Recent amendments did not make any substantive changes to the bill, only added co-authors. SB 27 is a 2-year bill, and staff suggested the LC maintain its support position. The LC did not take additional action on this item. 8B3H, Assembly Bill 247, Professions and Vocations License Requirement, Business Surety Bond Requirement. Staff reported that SB 247 would repeal the requirements for an individual to obtain a license to perform the following activities: fitting or selling hearing aids, locksmithing, barbering, or the application of makeup, disposing of cremated human remains, and performing custom upholstery services. The bill also modifies the regulation of certain landscapers and tree service contractors to require a license to work on projects valued at $25,000 or more. The bill also repeals the requirement that a licensed private investigator maintain a physical office in California, and that auctioneers and auction companies maintain a bond issued by a surety company. This is a 2-year bill, and staff suggests that the LC maintain its opposed position on SB 247. The LC did not take additional action on this item. 8B3I, Senate Bill 547, Professions and Vocations, Weights and Measures. SB 547 is one of 2 omnibus bills that contain language at the request of the CBA and would do the following. First, amend Business and Professions Code sections 5063.3A4 to clarify that during a sale or merger of a practice, a licensee may only disclose client information to the successor licensee or person if the parties enter into a written non-disclosure agreement. Second, amend Business and Professions Code Section 5096.9 to allow the CBA to initiate a Section 100 rulemaking to quickly extend or remove the inoperative dates of the CBA's practice privilege regulations. Staff suggests that the LC maintain its support position on SB 547. The LC did not take additional action on this item. 8B3J, Senate Bill 715, Department of Consumer Affairs, Regulatory Boards, removal of board members. Staff reported that SB 715 would grant the governor power to remove any member of a DCA board appointed by the governor within the Department of Consumer Affairs for continued neglect of duties, an example of which is a failure to attend board meetings. Staff suggested that the LC maintain its support position on SB 715, and we did not take additional action on this item. 8B3K, Senate Bill 795, Accountancy Practice Privileges. SB 795 would remove the January 1st, 2019 repeal date of the CBA's Practice Privilege statute, thereby making the CBA's no notice, no fee practice privilege program permanent. The sponsors of the bill and staff from the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee indicated that this bill would be a 2-year bill to allow time for the CBA to issue its report to the legislature on its practice privilege program, which is due January 1st, 2018. Staff will remain in contact with the sponsors of SB 795 as it progresses during the 2018 legislative year. Staff recommend the CBA maintain its watch position on SB 795, so the LC did not take additional action on this item. 8B3L, Senate Bill 800, Professions and Vocations. SB 800 is the second omnibus bill that contains language at the request of the CBA and would do the following. Amends Business and Professions Code Sections 5094D regarding credential evaluation services requirements. Specifically, it would correct a minor inaccuracy in the name of one organization by changing one word from singular to plural and updating the name of another member organization to reflect its current name. Staff suggested that the LC maintain its support position on SB 800, so the LC did not take additional action on this item. 8B4, moving on to item 8B4 on the agenda, which is consideration of position on legislation, Senate Bill 244, Privacy Agencies' Personal Information. This bill exempts from disclosure under the California Public Records Act records containing sensitive personal information, requires state agencies under the Information Practices Act to collect and use personal information only for the purpose of administering their respective public services and programs, and exempts from the PRA records containing personal information of participants in numerous public service and benefits programs. At the June 2017 monthly DCA Legislative Roundtable, staff was informed by DCA executive staff that this bill would not have a significant impact on the PRA request process or the CBA's daily business operations. Legal counsel voiced concerns over the bill's effect on the Information Practices Act. The LC discussed this issue and requested that staff reach out to DCA to clarify the concerns that were raised during our discussion. The LC recommends that the CBA direct staff to clarify any concerns surrounding the Information Practice Act at the next DCA Legislative Roundtable and to report back at the September Legislative Committee meeting.
Thank you. This is a fully formed motion from the legislative committee. Is there any questions from the board members?
Could you just repeat the motion is to direct staff?
Yes, the Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA direct staff, us to direct staff to clarify any concerns, all concerns that were raised during our discussion surrounding the Information Practice Act at the next DCA Legislative Roundtable, and then to report back to us on their discussions at the September LC meeting.
Any other questions from the board?
Is there any, is this also a 2-year bill? Is there time to get to that September meeting to take a position, or will this bill have met its fate prior to our next convening? Is there a way to predict that? Or
Well,
weigh
it
in?
would have to be, it would be resolved from the legislature's perspective before the next board meeting. The governor, I think, has until September,
Is it August 21st?
Is it 30th?
to act on the
15th,
bill.
October 1st.
Or is it October 1st? October 1st to act on the bill. So the only recourse would be to tell the governor what you think at that point, unless we have a special meeting in between.
So by deferring it, essentially, we're not weighing in at all?
On the
because
at the
we're
legislative level.
missing at the legislative level.
Correct.
And the only other option would maybe then to say, we're watching it because we had some questions, but that wasn't what the committee recommended.
That, yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Any other questions from the board members? Any questions from the public? Now we'll call for the vote.
Jen Oyang?
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park?
Yes?
Deirdre Robinson?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
And Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 8B5, update on legislation the California Board of Accountancy is monitoring. This includes AB 12, AB 495, AB 826, AB 827, AB 835, AB 876, and AB 1053. This was a written report only. Moving on to 8B6, legislative items for future meetings. There was no new legislation that was presented, and that concludes my report on behalf
Well
of the LC.
done, you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on to item C, our Committee on Professional Conduct, and I think Mr. Campos is going to be helping us out with that.
Yeah, on behalf of the Chair Kamalot, item 13C2 was a discussion on evaluating the need to require tax-specific continuing education for CPAs who perform tax services. The purpose was to evaluate that question. Should there be any more explicit CE requirements around providing tax services? Presently, the CBA requires licensees offering accounting and auditing, or A&A services, to complete specified CE in areas of governmental auditing, or A&A, and fraud. Staff reported that periodically the CBA evaluates CE requirements for licensees and has instituted new requirements such as increased exposure to ethics, dedicated regulatory review, and yearly minimum CE requirements, the nature of the delivery of CE, various things that the board has taken up. Presently, to renew an inactive status, licensees must complete 80 hours of CE in specific subject areas, and there's seven area requirements. One is a 50-50 requirement. 2 is ethics education. 3 is governmental auditing, if that applies to the licensee. 4th is accounting and auditing, again, if it applies to licensees. 5th is fraud. 6 is regulatory review, and then 7 is a 2012 requirement. Licensees also have to meet a 50-50 requirement, which is designed to maintain or enhance the technical skills and knowledge of a licensee by requiring a licensee renewing an inactive status to complete a minimum of 40 hours of CE, or 50% of the requirement, in technical subject areas. Conversely, a licensee can complete a maximum of 50% or no more than 40 hours in a non-technical subject matter. Due to a broad range of subject matter and to the specialized nature of taxation, the CBA addresses taxation as a technical subject area within the 50-50 requirement. Staff researched 49 state boards of accountancy to determine if any required specified CE in the area of taxation. Only 2 states, Delaware and Ohio, require prescribed CE solely in taxation. And CPC Chair Famelot suggested that staff research other states' CE requirements for tax practitioners. And actually, I don't think he said other states, but rather there may be other tax preparer requirements outside of the CPA licensing process that might actually instill some CE requirements on tax preparers, and that might be beneficial future discussion. There was no action taken by the CPC on that particular matter.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, why not?
Well, we have recommended that Ms. Wright recuse herself on this item because of her status as a continuing education provider, but it is only advice. But I just want to let the board know that, because any action that is taken could be subject to challenge based on potential or perceived
Appreciate that
conflict.
feedback. Yeah, I mean, this is a report back, but what's your comment?
Right, this is not, I mean, we're not voting on anything. I brought up the comment, I'd like to add a little bit of background and then ask a question. One question that typically comes up in this area is the reason that we don't have any explicit regulation of tax, particularly with the CE, is because the IRS IRS is a huge agency, and they are the ones that regulate tax return preparation. They do not. The Washington D.C. Court of Appeals has made it quite clear that regulation of tax return preparation is not a function, it's not authority that has been granted to the IRS currently under the U.S. Code. The IRS has gone back to Congress to ask for that authority, and it currently is in the budget proposed by President Trump. Whether it passes or not, I have no idea. That being the case, licensing tax return preparers is a responsibility that falls upon the states. The states, there are 5 of them: California, New York, Maryland, Oregon, and most recently Connecticut, that have assumed the responsibility for licensing tax return preparation. All of those states exempt attorneys, CPAs, enrolled agents. The reason they exempt those categories is on the presumption that those licensees who are licensed by other boards within that particular state have addressed the issue of tax proficiency with respect to, for example, a CPA preparing a tax return for compensation. Our board does not address that specifically, and that's the reason for my concern. Outside of the exempt categories of attorney, CPA, and enrolled agent, these 5 states do have, 4 of them have examination requirements. California is the one that does not. All of them have continuing education requirements, and all of the continuing education to be a licensed tax return preparer is in tax. And so that leads me to raise the question as to why we are presumed to be regulating and ensuring that CPAs know something about tax, when in fact I can tell you firsthand that the graduation, you can graduate with a degree in accounting, take only a single tax class, get a master's in accounting and never take a tax class, pass the CPA exam knowing a little bit of tax but not much, and then start doing tax returns with your CPA license. My question to you folks, for which I would like an answer, is the following. I currently have a general CPA license. If I were to choose to change my career and start doing accounting and attest work, I would have to take all sorts of continuing education courses, come up to date, and so forth and so on. Someone with an accounting and attest license, if they were to decide to change their career and start doing tax work, they would have to do nothing, and I don't understand why.
That question was already deliberated at the CPC. I reported, we went through all the requirements. We evaluated whether there was anything further. There's a code of conduct that a CPA has to follow. That was a factor, and there was no action taken by the CPC at this time. So I think that's probably, I hear your question, and the 5 states and those requirements outside of attorneys and CPAs, sounds like that maybe gives staff a path to research which is consistent with what was requested by the CPC for future dialogue, but I think asked and answered. The CPC went through it.
Well, and I think your explanation regarding the requirements for dedication of technical subject matter, that covers taxation. So, that's within the category of continuing education, the technical subject that people are required to take if they're in that area. So that would be my response to that
Yeah,
question.
there'd been a request to put this on the CPC's agenda. CPC put it on the agenda, went through it, and just reported back.
Okay.
Okay. Item C3
Thank you.
is discussion and possible action to initiate a rulemaking to amend Title 16 of the California Code of Regulations, Section 12.5, attest experience and experience forms, 11A6 and 11A6A, under BPC Section 5095, specifically amending the Certificate of Attest Experience forms. Staff indicated that this item was to clarify the attest experience reporting requirements for signers of the Certificate of Attest Experience, or CAE, forms for those who report attest experience as it relates to applications for CPA licensure. The Qualifications Committee reviewed the CAE forms at its April 26, 2017 meeting. During the discussion, it identified sections 5 and 6 on the CAE forms as areas that could benefit from clarifying language to ensure proper reporting in those sections. The Qualifications Committee suggested that to better align with CBA's definition of attest services and attest reports, Section 5 should include the clarifying language that specifically excludes preparation engagements from qualifying attest experience. The Qualifications Committee indicated that to maintain consistency within the CAE forms, the area of Section 6 that summarizes the hours corresponding with Section 5 should also include clarifying language. At yesterday's CPC meeting, staff identified additional minor non-substantive changes that were incorporated. Legal counsel suggested the CAE forms to be consistent with current law, suggested that the CAE forms allow use of an individual taxpayer identification number on the CAE forms to be consistent with current law. So with that, there is a motion that the CPC recommends to the CBA Approve the proposed regulatory text in CBA regulations, section 12.5, including the changes to the CAE forms with the addition of the individual taxpayer identification on the CAE form, which are incorporated by reference.
Thank you.
Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing and future agenda items.
Yes. All right, this is a fully formed motion from the Committee on Professional Conduct. Is there any questions from the board? Any questions from the public? With that, we'll call for the vote.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Jin Oyang.
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
And Jose Campos.
Yes.
Okay, with that, the motion passes unanimously.
Lastly, the CPC discussed placing on a future agenda an item regarding CE requirements for elected officials. That concludes the report.
Thank you, Mr. Campos, for that and for filling in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to closing business. We're going to move on to item A. Are there any public comments? Seeing none. We're going to go on to item B, agenda items for future Board of Accountancy meetings. I know Ms. Wright has several.
Well, I have one.
Oh,
But the one item that has come up a couple of times today, or yesterday rather, is a discussion of costs and cost recovery from the individual that is being investigated. We see consistently that the total costs of the investigation do not generally equal the amount of the reimbursement that the person being investigated agrees to pay. I had made the comment that I thought that this represented an expenditure of taxpayer funds and that other agencies treat that with more, certainly with more transparency than we do in the context of posting on their website every time they do have a debt forgiveness, which involves taxpayer funds. Dominic had then mentioned that most of
Can I just interrupt for
Please.
a second? I hear the question is, can we put the item on the agenda around cost recovery?
Yes.
I don't know that we need to further discuss comments or play-by-play on that. Maybe we just put the item
what's
on
the
the agenda.
specific thing you're asking to put on the agenda for the next time?
What I would be asking for is either representation by CBA or actual inclusion in our pink sheets of evidence of the fact that the person cannot pay the costs.
So just
we
the,
do that?
just
I was
the
gonna say.
agenda item would be just discussion of cost recovery
And
the-
documentation of the cost of, whatever decision is made on cost recovery, that decision be documented.
Can we put that in there?
If you would like to put that on a
Let's
future
go ahead and
agenda
put
item.
that on a future agenda item. Okay, great.
Can I
Ms. Hines?
just, I would actually like it to be a more expanded discussion. I agree with Ms. Wright's recommendation that it be an agenda item, but I just don't want it to be too circumscribed, because I
Mhm.
think there's a broader discussion that can be had. I just wanna make sure that as we discuss it, it's not just solely on that issue which she expressed, but just the overall issue of, you know, how cost recoveries figure in and the impact that it has on our duties to protect the consumers. I just want to make sure it's a broad enough discussion.
Okay. Any other board member items that they want placed? Okay, with that, we are going to go ahead and move back into closed session. Pursuant to Government Code Section 11126C3, the California Board of Accountancy will convene into closed session to deliberate on disciplinary matters, stipulated settlements, default decisions, and proposed decisions.
Alicia, I'm very sorry. I'm so sorry. Can I add one more item to the future agenda?
Let's do it fast.
What we just spoke about related to cannabis and what sort of response the Board of Accountancy would have to the whole issue of recreational cannabis use.
That was it?
response in what regard?
I can, well, now I have to get into a little bit of detail, but I can
Can we
give
just leave that to
shortly.
the president to
Yes.
kind of
Sure.
validate what that topic
Maybe
is?
she can
Just-
talk to you
Let's
one-on-one.
talk online. We have it written down, so
Okay.
we can go ahead and do that, but we need
That's
to move
fine.
on.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to repeat this, so, going back into closed session, again, pursuant to Government Code Section 11126C3, the California Board of Accountancy will convene into closed session to deliberate on disciplinary matters, stipulated settlements, default decisions, and proposed decisions. With that, we are adjourned.